So welcome everyone to our second meeting of our Introduction to Networks version 7 class at Stanley Community College for instructor training classes. Again, this is, I'm Kelly Cottle, hey, and we are going to look at mostly chapter 2 today. I'm going to just touch a few little things in chapter 1. I don't think there's much in chapter 1 that you really need me to go over. I'm going to share my screen 2. Here we go. So in chapter 1, I think a great deal of this is things you already know. For your students, this is kind of a catch-all chapter that's just getting them going and getting them familiar with what's going on in the class. By the way, I do have the chat open if you need to chat to me. I also have, you are welcome to unmute yourself and talk anytime you need to. So, but the different trends here, I think the big one that I kind of do look a little bit at are these networking trends, some of the BYOD things. Oops, that happened because I left it open too long. So if you ever get the access denied, it just means you haven't, you've let it sit too long, and it has basically logged you out of the content hub. So under those trends, again, BYOD, bringing your own device. Online collaboration, which we're doing right here, as a matter of fact. And I think the big thing they don't really talk about here as much that they need to. I will show you something too. You'll notice how it looks like that this is a really big section, 171. But then as you scroll through, it's really not that much. You just go down through here and there's some small items here. So it's not that big of a thing. I will say that they're missing here, in my opinion, and that is IoT. I do love this check the understanding things they've got now, where you go in and say, you know, which feature is a good conference tool to use. Those are located anywhere, you know, video communication. So, and then you can check yourself using power outlets. By the way, this is something I used to totally dismiss as power line networking. I would just say, hey, you know, who would use that? That's dumb. Well, guess what? Then I had students who were from New York City and from other big cities in my instructor training classes. And they were like, no, you don't understand. In the apartment buildings we live in, there are so many wireless devices that you cannot find an open wireless spectrum to be able to run your wireless networking. And so many of them were actually using these power line networking adapters in order to have wired connections to their devices to defeat the wireless problems they were having in their buildings. You know, my closest neighbor's a bunch of cows in the field. So it just simply is something I never thought about. But it is something to think about when you have to start looking at different ways of, with it being a global program, I'm sorry, I got to take my jacket off, I'm getting warm. With it being a global program, it is important to realize that some of the stuff that's in here may not make sense to you for our areas, but it does make sense in other areas, like in Europe or in big cities. So that was interesting. The other thing, again, I wish they would have just touched on is IoT. Internet of Things, which I'm teaching an entire class on that. So that's part of what I'm doing in there. I do want to go over something real quickly, and that is don't forget in the class itself under modules is where you'll see your assignments and the labs themselves and packet tracers. The packet tracers, you obviously do need packet tracer. If you don't have packet tracer, you can download it by going into the I'm opening this in a new window. By going into resources, packet tracer resources, and then going to your packet tracer's download page, so you can download packet tracer there. But those are for your packet tracers and your labs. If it's not a written lab, remember that those will be the labs that we do inside of netlabs.stanley.edu. So in your class here, which in this case is an Intro version 7 class, these are the labs that will be completed using real gear on our NetLab system. Now I'm going to actually walk you through one of those here in just a minute as we're going to look at this basic switch configuration, in-device configuration lab, which is one part of chapter 2. All right. So with that, any questions on chapter 1? I think it's a pretty simple chapter that you read it and it makes sense for you. All right, well, let's look at chapter 2. I will tell you, one of the things I really like about the new curriculum is we all know there's different types of learners. There's people who can read a book and learn things, and there are people who need to be lectured to, And then there are people who are hands-on folks. Now, most of us would qualify as being probably in that hands-on department, where give me the stuff, let me start doing it. It used to be in the Introduction to Networks class that you didn't get into configuring a device until much later. But they have actually now made it to where one of the first things you do in Chapter 2 is you start actually learning how to configure a Cisco iOS device. Now, when we say iOS, it is capital iOS, and so it's the Cisco Internetworking Operating System. And I will tell you, all Cisco devices are just specialized computers. That's it. You should know that you could take a PC and make it a router with the right software on it. You can take, it's hard to make a PC into a switch. Technically, you could do it if you had a white box switch, but you know, there are ways to make devices into networking devices. Sorry, my phone is making noises. Let me mute my phone. Should have done that beforehand. All right. So, but again, we've got your hardware, your kernel, and your shell. And if your students have had any Microsoft classes, this should be fairly familiar, talking about the kernel level components, talking to the hardware, and then the user level components talking outside on the shell, and then you're having the delineation between kernel level components and user level components. Well, in many ways, that's exactly the same as in the Cisco iOS. Now, Cisco iOS, there are more GUIs now than there used to be, but for the Cisco iOS, it is a command line interface. It is a operating system designed to run on their equipment. It is proprietary. It is available in Cisco Download. And by the way, if you are a Cisco Academy and you are in good standing, in other words, your academy is running and you are up and going, you can get what is called NetAcad maintenance. Now, that does not mean they will replace your physical equipment, but it means that you will have access to the images that are needed for the curriculum. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that today, but be aware you can get the images that are needed for the curriculum. Now, that doesn't mean you can go out and download an image for a Cisco 9000 series switch that is nowhere in the curriculum. But you will be given access to the 2960s, the 4000s, 2900s, the different software that you will need in order to run your gear in your labs. It is also only designed to be used for gear in the lab, not for gear in the production environment. So when we look at accessing a Cisco device, we've got some in-band and out-of-band management options. Out-of-band is anything that's not over the network. In our case, that would be console, and also there is an auxiliary port that you can use to connect a modem to and access a router, believe it or not, via a dial-in modem connection. It's a reverse telnet connection via modem. The other methods are in-band methods, and in-band would be across the network. And the two most common there are Secure Shell and Telnet. And technically, if you're accessing the web interface on a Cisco device, that would be in-band management also. But SSH is the way to go for your in-band management because it encrypts the communication between you and the device you're connecting to. You really should never use Telnet to connect to a device over a network, even if it is on just the management VLAN, because it sends everything in clear text. So someone on that particular network could grab your information very, very easily. So in-band would be Secure Shell Telnet, out-of-band would be console, and I would say also the auxiliary would be out-of-band. Now, different programs that we use for terminal emulation, Putty is one of the ones that we use. It's actually my favorite. There's also Super Putty. There's all different kinds, but here's Putty. You see it right here. So you look at different types of connections. You can do a Telnet, SSH, or serial. We'll talk about a serial connection and what it is. TerraTerm is a different one. Secure CRT is one that a lot of people use too. So all of these are good. There is a Secure Putty, and there's like multiple different types of putties out there that you can use that are good. I do like this, again, which access method would be most appropriate. If you are in the equipment room with a new switch that needs to be configured, that would be the console. And what you're going to learn is we've got a special cable will connect into the console port on the back of the switch. What would be most appropriate if you had a special cable and were told to configure the switch? That would also be a console. If you're doing in-band iOS over a network connection, that would be telnet. And if you were asked by your manager that you can't get to another router over the internet, but you can get to it to a telephone, that would be auxiliary, because that is the only way to use auxiliary. So these are really good for your students and for you. So let's look at getting around in the iOS. Now, one of the things that when you go into NetLabs, if you click on a device, it will open up the device itself. And you see this is a switch, the alligator mouth prompt. That's what I call it anyway. But this is the user exec mode. In the user exec mode, if I do a question mark here, you'll see that I've got basically 1.25 pages of different commands that I can use. So I can do, I can clear, connect, I can do some ping commands, I can do some show commands. You'll do a show question mark, and you'll see there's a good amount of stuff I can show here, a couple pages. All right, but if I type enable, you'll see it changes to a different prompt. This prompt is privilege exec mode. Now, if I do a question mark, you will see that instead of a page and a quarter, there's 2 pages, 3 pages, 3.25 pages of commands. In other words, I'm going to type exit to go back out. So I'm in exit. Now I am in user exec mode. This mode is what we call, quite honestly, I call it look and see mode. So user exec mode is where you can, almost like a view only mode, because you can't do any configuration in user exec mode. You can look at certain things, but you can't change them. Privilege exec mode, which again you get to by typing in the command enable. And by the way, you can shorten commands. So if you type enable, that will work. Or if you type en, let me hit enter here. Type en, that will also work. However, E will not work, and I'll show you why. It will give you an ambiguous command. Do E question mark, it will tell you there are 2 commands that begin with E. E, enable, and exit. So if I put NA, that's the shortest form of the command that is not ambiguous. So now I'm in privilege exec mode. And you've got, at this point, the ability to configure the router. And in fact, this is, you've got full command. You can do anything you want in privilege exec mode. Now, we're going to learn how to control access from user exec mode to privilege exec mode, because obviously you really don't want someone just to be able to connect to your router or switch and get into privilege exec mode. That is going to be an enable secret password we're going to use. All right. There are also other configuration modes, and there's several commands on here, but inside of these we can go into what is called global config, and config T is short for, sorry, I should have, by the way, you also can use tab. So you can do tab just like in Linux, configure terminal, and config T is short for configure terminal. Now I'm in what's called global configuration mode. If I go to line console 0, and by the way, there's only one console line because there's only one port that you can plug console port in, you'll see now I'm in config-line. So I'm in a line configuration mode. I can actually do now and go to interface config mode. Now, a lot of people think you have to go all the way back. They think you have to go exit, and then go to interface FA0/1. Okay, so now I'm in config if. But actually, I could have been in line con 0, and I could have went straight to interface FA01, as long as I know the command. I can hop around as much as I want. One thing you can't normally do is run commands that are not configuration commands inside of configuration, unless you use a special command. By the way, let's imagine I wanted to use a show command. If I do show IP interface brief, you'll see it says invalid. But if I put do in front of it, it will actually run that command as if I am not in configuration mode. So do is your friend. It runs it as if you're just sitting in privilege exec mode. So do is a good thing, and they'll mention that in the curriculum later. But we notice this is an interface configuration mode. This is just global configuration mode. There are other config modes available, especially on routers, such as routing protocol configuration mode and others. For our this chapter in particular, we really only need to know about line configuration modes and interface configuration modes. If we need to move around inside the iOS, again, you can go by using the exit. Exit will drop you back one level. If, however, let's say I'm in here and I want to get all the way out, there's two ways I can do it. I can type end, and it will drop me completely out of configuration mode. Okay. And so I might say I'm all the way in line console 0. If I type end, it drops me all the way back out. So one way is end. Another way is to hit Control Z, and that will drop you all the way out of configuration mode. So those are two good commands to know. Some other things that are good to know is if you're in config T or you're in global config or you're in anything, and you're trying to do, and you want to go to the beginning of a command, if you want to repeat it, you just hit the up arrow, and then you can hit Control A to go to the beginning and Control E to go to the end. And so Control A will let me go back here. So if I want to get rid of something, I can put no in front of it, which you can't get rid of the con line, but Control E if I need to add something to it. All of those are different options. You will learn how to bounce around inside the iOS. A lot of people ask me, do I know any programming languages? And I can get around a little bit in Python, but in a lot of ways, the iOS is just a programming language for a Cisco device. That's all it is. How do I program it to do what I want it to do inside of the command line interface? All right. So these syntax checkers here, this will allow you to, I'm just going to have it show me. It just, and in here you have to actually type the entire command. You can't do shortened commands in the syntax checker, which is kind of good because you at least learn that. Any questions about privileged exec and user exec modes? All right. Let's look at how commands, and by the way, when I say a programming language, they do, all commands in iOS share a basic structure. They're going to be at some prompt, either user exec or privileged exec. You're going to have the command, space, some article, space, again, keyword or argument. So you've got keywords and arguments. So in this case, ping, space, the IP address, the argument or keyword is, or the argument is 192.168.10.5. In show IP protocols, the keyword is show IP protocols. I do want to show you something really neat. Let's say you don't know a command. Let's say I knew it had something to do with lines, but I didn't know anything else. I could type L ? And see all the commands that begin with L. So there's line, so I got line ? And then if I hit a question mark, it tells me all the things that could go underneath that. So, oh, there it is, it's console, ? And then notice 0-TAC0. So there's only one console line. And then now when I do a question mark, it shows me all the commands that are available underneath the console line. You'll notice the first item up here is access class. I do, went too far. If I do a config E and do a question mark here, you'll see access class is not the first thing that's available because it's a different context. I'm in global config asking for help. You need to learn the iOS well enough that you can get around without having to use the question mark a great deal. But I will tell you this, a lot of times if you just learn this basic arguments and the way a command structure works, even if you don't know a command or can't remember a command, you can kind of argue your way through it with the question mark. So some other examples here, switch port security aging. This just shows you a command with multiple arguments. Switch port security aging, that is the command, and then you can do either static, a time, type absolute, inactivity. So there's different items you can do with multiple arguments for that particular command. And it's not important that you know what this does, just that you know it can have multiple arguments with it. There's a video on the help features and some of the hotkeys. The ones I use most are the up arrow and Control A, Control E. Those are the big ones. Some of these, like moving back and forth one word to the left or right, I use the arrow keys on those. Now, again, here's our packet tracer, navigate the iOS. I believe this one was just a look and see. This live I'm not even asking you to do because it's not set up inside of NetLabs, but if you wanted to do it at your own site, you're more than welcome to. You'll notice here we've got a single router here with a laptop connecting via the console cable, which If you're from North Carolina, then you know this is the ugly Carolina blue color. I went to NC State, so I can make fun of Carolina. So the ugly Carolina blue color. The one thing here that they don't show you is that they're showing a console DB9 connection going to a laptop. Almost no laptop has a DB9 on it anymore, so this will be USB, and you may have to load your USB driver, so be aware of that. But when you do this connection, you have to set up a basic connection with the terminal emulation program. And that requires you to use 9600 baud, 8 data bits, 8 in 1, 8 in no stop bits, 1 parity bit. I think that's correct. I had to look it up on the Putty. Where'd it go? My Putty disappeared. So I'm going to a serial connection here. I go down to serial, it'd be 9600 speed, baud, 8 data bits, 1 stop bit, no parity. And now here's one place people get in trouble with, especially with USB to serial connectors. If it's a DB9, you can typically leave flow control on, X off, but it really needs to be turned to none if you're using a USB to serial connector. I've seen that actually cause problems. The other issue is with USB to serial connectors, a lot of times the COM ports will move around. If it's a COM port, like a DB9 connector on the back of a PC like this is on my PC, it's not going to change. But with a laptop with a USB to serial connector, I've actually seen it be COM3 one time, COM5 the next. It'll move around unless you hard set it, which you can do inside the advanced properties for device manager. So be aware of this. If you're going to be connecting a physical cable into the console port, then 9600, 8 data bits, 1 stop bit, no parity, flow control none. In NetLabs, what's happening is when you click here, it's actually creating a reverse telnet connection with those settings already in place to go into this device. So that's the negative of NetLabs. You can't physically connect the cable. Crazy thing is, though, if you get your CCIE, you don't physically connect the real gear anymore anyway. Every bit of it's virtualized gear. So kind of be able to need to do both. Oh, close this. All right, so go back down here. Do basic device configuration. So what do we want to do in order to configure a switch at its basic level? Well, the first is we got to give it a name. That command is simple. It's called hostname. All right. So a very simple command. Now, what I tell people to do is I tell them to create themselves a notebook. Just grab a little cheap notebook. It can be anything. Here's a little Palo Alto notebook I got at some conference. But grab you a notebook and start making a set of all the commands that you're going to have in the class. This way, when it comes time to do your hands-on labs and comes time to teach your students, that's one thing you can do. The other thing that's a really neat little book to have is the Ccna Portable Command Guide, which idea they stole directly from me because it was my idea. It's okay. I'm not bitter about it. But inside of NetLabs here, since this is switch 2, if I wanted to give it a host name, I could just type hostname S2, right? Wait a minute, it didn't work. Why didn't that work? Anybody? Why didn't that command hostname? I mean, that's the command S2. Why didn't that work? Anybody want?
Gotta be in the mode first.
Exactly. I'm not in the correct mode. First off, I got to be in privileged exec mode, right?
Yes.
And then I got to go into global configuration mode. So you'll notice if you ever have a command that says that it doesn't know what the command is, check to see if you're in the correct mode. All right. But now if I do a host name, by the way, I can just do host S2 because I'm lazy. Now you see it immediately has changed to S2. Here's another caveat I want you to be very, very clear on. By default, when you're making changes here, everything's being changed in the running config. If you're familiar with Palo Alto firewalls, it's just like the fact that before you click that commit button, nothing really has changed. So if I go in here, so I've given it a host name, I'm gonna go ahead and align con 0, and I'm just gonna do a password of Cisco, and I'm gonna do login. So I've got my console. So if I type exit here and exit, oops, exit, Control Z, I can't type today. I type exit out of here. You'll see now it's asking me for a password to get to the console because I put a console password on. I'm gonna go over that in a second. I'll type Cisco. And you'll see now I'm in. But watch what happens. I'm gonna reload this, and I'm gonna say no. I'm not gonna save the system configuration. I'm gonna let this one boot while I go back to the curriculum a minute. I'm gonna show you what happens when we come back to this switch 2. What do you think is gonna happen since I didn't save the configuration? I didn't save the config, and it's going to reboot. So it has nothing in the startup config that's been saved. So this switch, when I reboot it now, I just lost all the configuration I did on it. Because when I'm configuring it, I'm configuring the running config. To save it, I would have had to copy the running config to the startup config. So again, over here, same thing. If I'm going to give it a name, host name. By the way, I don't have to be in, even though host name is a global config mode, as long as I know the command, I can type it pretty much anywhere. You'll see now that it's there. If I wanted this host name to stay and survive a reboot, I would need to do the following. I need to do a copy running config to startup. Okay, now that's the technical term. That's what you're supposed to do. I'm very lazy, so I just type WR. WR is the old Cisco command, which is short for write memory. And so WR, that's a whole lot shorter than me doing copy running config startup config. However, on the test, when you go to take the CCNA, the correct command is copy running config startup config. All right. Real world, do WR. That way you can get more work done quicker. All right. And I even teach my students WR, but I make sure they know the copy running config startup config. Let's see, this thing's still booting. By the way, this is real gear, so it is not. Now look, see, I lost my host name and I lost my password. There's no password asking me to go into user exec mode because I didn't save it. That bites people so often because they forget to save their configs. And in fact, I'll tell you a terrible thing that happens. What we used to do, if you were in a seated instructor training and you were doing your hands-on final, the very first thing we always did is we walked over you said, yeah, I'm ready for mine to be checked. We would walk over to your routers and your switches, and we would turn your routers off, and we'd pull the power from your switches and then plug them back in. You should hear people start screaming when you work. You know, you get the first one turned off, and they start screaming, wait, I'm not ready, I'm not ready. And then, so just be aware, make sure that you do that. Otherwise, and the reason this is so important to teach your students is imagine that your student gets a job, they know this stuff up one side, down the other, but they forget to save the config, and they had to drive over to another city 30 minutes away to configure this router or switch. Well, that router or switch works for 6 months until the power goes out. And when the power goes out and that switch reboots and they didn't save the config, it comes back up blank. And so there's the kind of problems you can run into if you forget to save your running config to your startup config. Questions about that? And I know that's down here, but I like to tell it early and often. It is something we have down here, but it's very important that you know that. Passwords. A couple types of passwords we have. First is the console password. You'll notice when I click on switch 1, if I type exit, okay, by default, if I just plug in a console cable and hit enter, I go into user exec mode. There's no password here. Same thing over here. There's no password. I type exit, you know, it's going to say it exits, but as soon as I hit enter, it just lets me straight into user exec mode. So the console password protects access to user exec mode. Now, I'm gonna go in here then on switch 2. I got to give it a name, config T, host S2. I'm going to align con 0. Now, they don't teach you this, but you should put this on every one of your console lines, but logging synchronous. Just trust me, it saves you from having to commands fall in the middle or output from information in the console going in the middle of your command. So logging synchronous should be on every single console that you have. I'm gonna set a password of Cisco, and I'm gonna tell it you gotta log in. Now we hit Control Z. I'm gonna write it. Now I'm gonna type exit. Now look what it does. Now it's prompting me for a user exec password, and that password I just put in was Cisco. The password is case sensitive, and it does consider a space as a character. So be careful that you don't set the password to Cisco space or class space. If your students lock themselves out of a router, I would try Cisco space or class space just to see if they accidentally put a space at the end of it. So notice again, now I have a password in order to get to user exec mode. S1 doesn't have that. Type exit, press enter, there it is. I go right into user exec. So if I want to change that, I can go into global config, line on 0, oops, on con 0, logging, synchronous, password. By the way, these are terrible passwords, but it's what we use in the labs. So don't ever use this in the real world. Now I didn't save my config, but it's okay. I hadn't reloaded it. It's still there. It's because I'm using the running config. But Cisco, then I would greatly recommend saving your config. So this console password controls user exec mode access. Now, once we're in user exec mode, it's probably a good idea to make it to where people can't just type enable and go straight into privilege exec mode, because remember, this mode here, privilege exec, is where I can make all the changes I want to a router. So our next password is the enable secret password. B. Patterson asked, did you say the console password protects access to user exec mode, although it is set from global config mode? Yes. Yes, that is correct. Because the global config modes where you set anything that affects the router globally, and the ability to get into user exec mode would be a global parameter or switch. I say router and switch interchangeably. Let's set enable secret of class. I'm gonna do a Control Z to drop out. Now watch what happens when I type exit. Now I have to put in my CISCO, Cisco, to get into user exec mode. And when I type enable now, watch what happens. It now prompts me for the privilege exec mode password. So if I type class, I can now get in. So these two passwords are our primary passwords to control access to via the console, user exec mode, and via the enable secret is how we protect access to privilege exec mode. And the last thing we had to do is protect access via in-band management to the V2I lines. You can see it's the exact same commands, except for there are 16 V2I lines. So we have to go in and say config T, line V2I 015. Password of Cisco, again, terrible password, but it's what we use for this login. You do not need to do login synchronous on this because it is not necessary. Now watch this, I'm going to do a show run, and when you look at your running config, you can see that your host name's been set. You can see there's enable secret, and also that enable secret is encrypted in the running config and the startup config, so that you can't reverse engineer it or shoulder surf somebody. If I hit the space bar, you'll see all my ports that are on the switch. And at the very bottom down here, you'll see what I've set for my console. So line con 0, password Cisco, login synchronous, login, and then 0 through 15. And this is just the way iOS does. It does 0 through 4, and then 5 through 15. Now, this is not good for somebody to be able to shoulder surf you and see what the passwords are inside of your running or startup config. By the way, watch this, show startup. You'll notice the host name's set, but you'll notice that the startup doesn't have the VTY lines configured yet. Because let me show you that again. Here's the running config. The running config, I have set the VTY line passwords and login requirement. But in the startup config, it's not there yet because I haven't saved I haven't done a copy running config to the startup config. As soon as I do this, however, now when I do a show start, you'll see that the changes I made to the V2I lines have been saved. All right. Now, seeing these passwords is not a good thing. So there's a special command, config T, and it is a global command, service password -encryption. So once you do that and do a do show run, you will see the passwords are now encrypted. Now this is not a very good encryption, because if I go over here and do on the internet and do a Cisco level 7 decrypt, okay, there's one little place here, you just take it and you drop it in. So here's the type 7 password I just had. Let me just get rid of that. Okay, you'll see it cracks it immediately. So even though it's encrypted with level 7, all right, same thing. This is, you'll see also, notice how it uses the exact same thing for all these, so you know all these passwords are the same. Service password encryption is not great for actual encryption. It just protects people from being able to shoulder surf you. If somebody gets a hold of your running config or your startup config, and you've got an admin password that you use here, that's very dangerous, so don't do that. But at least you can use service password encryption to hide it from somebody trying to shoulder surf you. All right, so that's this command right here, service password encryption. Banner message of the day, this one's just a little funky because you need to realize something. When you do banner MOTD, whatever character you put next, it will be the start delineating character or the start character. So if I put a £, and then I put HE hello pound, that stops the message immediately. So wherever I put another £. So you don't ever want to use for banner MOTD as your starting character a C, because if you do cannot see this, the message will actually end up being just cannot, because the C is the ending character. You can do a do show run. So you need to pick, when you do your banner message of the day, you need to pick a character that is not, see, something that's going to be inside of your banner. So what I usually do is this. I do a banner, use the pound, banner MOTD, use the £. Then you can do some funky ASCII stuff. You do the star, because the star is not the £. And then you shall not pass. Little Lord of the Rings reference there. Flame of Arnor. Now, this is a terrible banner message of the day, because the banner message of the day message should be something that is approved by your lawyers. And what happened is when you log into a device or connect to it, that banner message of the day will show up. So it should say something like unauthorized access is prohibited, et cetera, blah, blah, blah. Make sure your lawyers figure out what it's supposed to say. Because there have been cases, believe it or not, where people have gotten away or gotten off of hacking charges because it said welcome. And because of that, they were able to say, Your Honor, they basically invited my client to come into the device. Now, that would probably depend on what judge you got, but be aware. The banner message of the day is important. Any questions about that? All right. Next item is saving the configurations, which, by the way, I've already kind of gone over. You got the running config and the startup config. Anytime you're altering the running, adding commands to a device, you are adding them to the running config. So if I do a show run here, you will see that the banner message of the day is down here at the bottom. If I do a show start, I haven't saved it yet, so the banner message of the day is not in this config. So again, do a write, Now when I do a show start, you will see that the banner message of the day has been saved. All the information was in the running config gets saved over to the startup config. So very, very important that your students and you are aware of that. I'll let you read through this. You can copy out a file to a text file, clean it up, and then have it where you can paste it right back in. Now, here's one of the things that's important for you to realize. In this packet tracer, the packet tracer will walk you through the, let me get logged in here because I always, the packet tracer will walk you through what you need to do. So it will tell you, give the host name, here's your passwords, your console passwords and everything. All of that's available. Here's secure privilege mode, so enable password C1 $ for enable secret. The enable password here, by the way, this is they really shouldn't even be using this, but there are two different passwords. There's an enable password and enable secret. They both do the same thing, except for the enable password does not store the password in an encrypted format that is secure. For this reason, I really wish they didn't even have this in here. You should never use an enable password because it's not really secure. And also, the second you put in an enable secret password, it overwrites the enable password. Okay, so this is something I wish they didn't even have in the packet tracer. But it is good to see that they've got you saving the configs, they've got it all in here, they've got you creating the different items. You're welcome, Corey. You got the different items in here that you can do. And then once you've done this, then you go back over to NetLabs and do the lab inside the basic lab, switch and lab in device configuration. You also remember, always use the content from here when you're doing the labs because they have been modified. I've got a lot of questions recently too about how do I fill in the information. Well, here's what I do. You either download it by clicking on the little arrow here and download it to your local machine, which I'm going to do. I'll download it to my documents. Then I just open Word, and any modern, especially Word 2016, but any modern Word version, you should be able to go into Word, and you'll have to have Word, well, where in the world's Word at? Word's hiding from me. Okay. In Word, you need to ask it to, open other document. You'll say browse. You'll tell it that you want to do all files and look in your documents where I got. And you have to do that because this is a PDF. So here's the lab. Double click it, open it in Word, and it'll say, well, now convert it to an editable Word document. Click OK. And it takes it a few seconds, and it will actually convert that PDF into a Word document. And then you can put in answers to any of the questions that are in the lab itself. So what's the status? Up, up. One thing I will ask is when you're filling these in, if you don't mind, go ahead and change your text color to a different color. Change it to blue or red or whatever. Just change it to a different color so I can see when you're typing in different colors. Or highlight it, either way you want to do it. You can do that too, you can just highlight it, but it's just easy, just change the color and then I can see it easily that you've added in here. Then you'll save this with your name at the front and you upload it under modules. So here's that activity right here. So you'll have an upload here that you can upload it and then I will grade it. Now some of you have already done this and I've graded it and thank you very much for that. Don't worry about saving your configs inside of NetLabs. It saves every keystroke you put in. So I know every single thing you've typed into NetLabs. One of the cool things you can do though is if you do want to save, for instance, part of this lab is you go in and you put IP addresses on these two devices. So you're going to go in and you're going to put 192.168.1.10 on PCA. I'm going to do that. And I know y'all know how to do this, but I just want to show you a quick little feature here that's cool about NetLabs. 1.10, and you don't need a default gateway because there's no router in this network. There's only switches, so there's no default gateway. You could put it in if you wanted to, but it's not going to have any effect because again, there's no There's no router in the network itself. And then this one is going to be 192.168.1.11. And the whole reason I'm doing this is to show you that click here, type CMD, you type an IP config, prove that you changed the IP address. You can ping 192.168.1.10. And I'm now showing I'm pinging 110 from 111. And this is one of the cool new features in NetLabs. I can go to this little drop down here and I can go take screenshot, and it will take this screenshot and submit it. And this screenshot is actually saved with your lab reservation information. And I can go and look at this. So take screenshot, and then it will show exactly what you've done there. Then when I go look at your reservations, if there's any questions, I can look at it and say, oh yeah, they proved they can ping it. We use this a lot if you're having trouble with the labs too. Questions about that? Okay. Run back over here real quick. The last thing really, as far as on a switch really doesn't have a port to apply IP addresses to. So when you look at a switch is a bunch of ports that are on a device, on the switch itself. So there's a bunch of ports on here, but those ports are designed for end devices to be plugged into. Now there is a command called no switch port, which lets you turn a port into a routed port. Not something we do a great deal of in CCNA level stuff, but something that may be used as you move down the road into other areas. But a switch, if you want to connect to and ping a switch and give it an IP address, the problem is you can't go into one of its physical ports. So when I go into this switch here, let me go back up, you'll see all these physical ports, FA01, 2, all the way down to gig 1, gig 2. These are not designed to put IP addresses on. In fact, if I go into one right now, if I go config T, interface FA0/1, IP add question mark, you'll see that command's not even allowed. I can't even put an IP address on that port. So on a switch, we have to use what is called a switched virtual interface, or an SVI. Now they're going to put it on VLAN 1 to begin with. That's just to teach you how to do it. Down the road, we will never put the management IP address on VLAN 1. We'll talk more about that later, but for now, just realize it all works the same whether you use VLAN 1 or VLAN 99. It's just at this point, you don't know what VLANs really are, so they can't teach you how to use other VLANs in VLAN 1. So we're going to put an IP address on switch 1. So we'll go to switch 1 here. I'm going to go to interface VLAN 1, and I'm going to give it an IP address. Now it's got to be in the same network as PC1 or PCA and B. So it's got to be on 192.168.1 dot, and I'm going to use 2 here. And then my mask is 255.255.255.0. Okay. And then I'm going to go to switch 2. I got to put in my passwords. Oop, I didn't have one on that one. I'm going to do int VLAN 1 IP add 192.168.1.3 255.255.255.0. So at this point, what I should have is in my topology, PCA is 192.168.1.10. So I go here, CMD, IP config. You'll see that it is 1.10. I'm going to ping 192.168.1.2, which should be switch 1. All right. You'll see that it fails the first time. It's almost like the virtual interface has to get up and running, but it failed the first time. But then I was able to ping from PCA to PC or to switch 1. Now I'm going to ping 192.168.1.3, which is switch 2, and it'll probably fail and then be good. There we go. So now I'm pinging from A to switch 1, switch 2. I've got connectivity there. And then if I go ahead and hit the up arrow and do 11, at this point I have full connectivity to everything. And I could actually do this. I could actually just do a screenshot, take a screenshot, and I just proved I have full connectivity to everything in my network because I can ping 1.1, 1.2, 1.3, and 1.11. So that switch virtual interface lets you put a management IP address on a switch. Questions about that? It is not a physical interface. It is a virtual interface. That's why it's called a switched virtual interface. Any other questions on that or any questions? All right, well, folks, I'm going to stop the recording. So let me go ahead and stop the recording. Let me stop the share first, then I'll stop the recording.